May 10th, 1945. Frankfurt, Germany. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. General Eisenhower sits behind a heavy oak desk surrounded by maps of a defeated Germany. The war in Europe ended exactly 48 hours ago. Outside the windows, soldiers are celebrating. Inside this, Eisenhower is reviewing occupation plans with his Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. They're discussing food distribution, refugee resettlement, the mechanics of peace. Then Bedell Smith slides a thin folder across the desk. His face is tight. "It's Patton again, sir." Eisenhower looks up. He's dealt with George Patton's controversies before: the slapping incident, the unauthorized advances, the inflammatory speeches. But the war is over now. What could Patton possibly... Third Army intelligence officers, Bedell Smith says slowly, are requesting detailed maps of Soviet defensive positions in Poland. They want road networks, supply routes. They're asking for maps showing the route from Berlin to Moscow. Eisenhower stares at him. For a moment, he says nothing. Then, very quietly, "Moscow, Moscow. The war in Europe is over, but in Bavaria, George S. Patton is planning the next. If you're here because you want the real untold stories of World War II, the ones that changed history but never made it into the textbooks, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join WWII Elite, where we uncover the moments that shaped our world. And drop a comment below. Do you think Patton was right? Let's discuss. Now, let's go back to that room in Frankfurt. Because what Eisenhower is about to discover will threaten the entire Allied coalition and bring the world closer to World War III than most people realize. Eisenhower opens the folder. Inside are intelligence requisition forms, map requests, and a summary report from SHAF's liaison officer with Third Army. The documents are dated May 7th, 8th, and 9th. Germany surrendered on May 7th. That means Patton's staff started requesting maps of Soviet territory the same day the surrender was signed, maybe even before. What the hell is Patton doing requesting maps of Poland? Eisenhower's voice is rising now. The war is over. Apparently his staff believe there's unfinished business, sir. Unfinished business? Eisenhower stands up, pacing now. We just finished business. We destroyed the Third Reich. We liberated Europe. That was the business, Bedell. Patton seems to believe the Soviets are the next business. Eisenhower stops. He turns to face his Chief of Staff. That's impossible. We're allies. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin just redrew the map of Europe at Yalta 3 months ago. Patton knows this. He was briefed. Apparently, sir, Bedell Smith says carefully, Patton thinks Yalta was a mistake. Eisenhower sits back down. He pulls the folder closer and starts reading more carefully. The requisition forms are routine in format, but the content is anything but. Third Army's G2 intelligence section is requesting maps showing Soviet tank positions in eastern Germany and Poland. They want assessments of Soviet supply lines, fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles. They want to know where the Red Army is weak, where it's vulnerable. This isn't academic curiosity. This is operational planning. How long has this been going on? Eisenhower asks. Bedell Smith flips open another folder. Based on intelligence reports we've reviewed, Third Army has been tracking Soviet unit movements since at least mid-April, before the surrender. They've been cataloging Soviet tank divisions, artillery positions, supply routes. It's comprehensive, sir. Very comprehensive. Eisenhower's jaw tightens. He opens his desk drawer and pulls out a map of Central Europe. He spreads it across the desk. Third Army is positioned in Bavaria and western Czechoslovakia. Soviet forces occupy positions roughly 60 to 80 miles to the east. Patton commands approximately 300,000 combat troops. They're fully supplied, fully equipped, battle-hardened from 9 months of continuous combat. They're the most lethal fighting force in Europe. And they're facing east. He can't be serious, Eisenhower mutters. George Patton is always serious. That's the problem. Bedell Smith leans forward. Sir, there's one more thing. According to staff meeting notes we obtained, Third Army officers have been discussing operational plans for what they're calling rear deployment eastward, not westward to the Pacific. Eastward, towards Soviet lines. Eisenhower looks up. They've been planning an offensive? It appears so, sir. Against the Soviet Union? Yes, sir. Eisenhower closes his eyes. He's fought alongside the Soviets for 2 years. They've coordinated operations, shared intelligence, divided Germany down the middle as allies. And now, 48 hours after victory, one of his army commanders is planning to attack them. He reaches for the phone. Get me 3rd Army headquarters. I need to speak with General Patton, now. But what Eisenhower doesn't know yet, what he's about to discover, is that Patton isn't just planning, he's already taken action, and those actions are about to bring the alliance to the breaking point. It's evening now, May 10th, 1945. The call goes through. Across the miles of occupied Germany, through military switchboards and field telephone lines, the connection is made. At his headquarters in Bavaria, George S. Patton picks up the receiver. He knows who's calling. Patton here. George. Eisenhower's voice is controlled, but there's an edge to it. I have a report in front of me that says 3rd Army is mapping routes into Soviet-controlled territory. Tell me it's a mistake. There's a pause. Then Patton's voice comes back, calm and unapologetic. No mistake. Contingency planning, basic staff work. Any competent headquarters should be doing the same. Contingency planning for what contingency, George? We're not at war with Russia. Not yet. Patton's response is immediate. But we gave them half of Europe, Ike. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania. Countries we promised to liberate, and now they're under Stalin's boot. The Red Army isn't leaving. They're fortifying, building occupation governments. We could fix that in 10 days if we move now. Eisenhower's hand tightens on the phone. George, we cannot... They're our allies. They lost 27 million people defeating Germany. Congress would never... President Truman would never authorize it. Patton's voice is gaining intensity now. We're already armed. 3rd Army is at peak strength. The Soviets, on the other hand, they're exhausted. They're at the end of supply lines that stretch back to Moscow. Their logistics are broken. They're expecting peace, not a fight. If we hit them now, we'd be in Warsaw in 4 days. The Soviet border in 10. Moscow by summer. Eisenhower stands up. The phone cord. George, listen to me very carefully. I am ordering you as Supreme Commander to cease all intelligence-gathering operations related to Soviet positions. Immediately. We are allies. You will act like it. Ike. Patton's voice drops. He's not arguing now. He's explaining, as if to a friend who doesn't understand. We're going to have to fight them sooner or later. You know it, I know it. Every officer with a map and a brain knows it. The Soviets aren't. They're totalitarians, they're expansionists. The only reason we allied with them is because Hitler was worse. Well, dead in a bunker in Berlin. But Stalin is very much alive, and he's swallowing Eastern Europe whole. Why not stop him now, when we have the advantage? Because, George, Eisenhower says, and his voice is ice now. The President of the United States says we are not going to fight them, and you follow orders from the President. Do you understand me? There's a long pause. Eisenhower can hear the static on the line. Finally, Patton speaks. Understood. Eisenhower softens slightly. He's known Patton for years. He respects him, even admires him. Patton won battles that no one else could win. He broke the German army at Normandy. He relieved Bastogne. He crossed the Rhine faster than anyone thought possible. But this is different. George, you won us this war. Don't throw it away by starting the next one without permission. Stand down. Yes, sir. The line goes dead. Patton has hung up. Eisenhower sets the phone back in its cradle and sits down heavily. He feels like he just extinguished a fire. He has no idea the fire is still burning. Because 500 miles south in Bavaria, George Patton puts down his phone and turns to his chief of staff, who's been listening to the entire conversation. He said, "Stand down." Patton says quietly, "Yes, sir." He didn't say disarm the Germans. 2 days later, May 12, 1945, a chef inspector named Colonel Harkins arrives at 3rd Army prisoner of war camps near Regensburg, Germany. He's there on a routine inspection. Official policy requires that all German military forces be immediately disarmed upon surrender. Weapons are to be collected, catalogued, and destroyed. It's a straightforward, except that when Colonel Harkins arrives at the camp, something is wrong. The camp holds approximately 40,000 German prisoners, but they're not behaving like prisoners. They're organized by unit. The men of the 11th Panzer Division are in one section, the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division in another, and they still have their officers. German colonels and majors are moving among. Colonel Harkins finds the senior American officer, a 3rd Army major named Roberts. "Major, why are these prisoners still organized by unit? Where are their weapons?" Major Roberts looks uncomfortable. "Weapons are inventoried and stored, sir." awaiting disposal. Awaiting disposal? They should have been destroyed a week ago. Where are they? Warehouse 3, sir. Colonel Harkins walks to Warehouse 3. What he finds inside makes him go cold. Rifles. Thousands of them. Machine guns. Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Mortars. Ammunition crates stacked floor to ceiling. Enough equipment to arm two, and it's not scattered or broken down. It's organized. By unit. By weapon type. As if waiting to be redistributed. Major Roberts, Harkins says slowly, why haven't these weapons been destroyed? Roberts shifts his weight. General Patton's orders, sir. He wanted them inventoried first. Full accounting before disposal. How long does an inventory take? Sir, How long, Major? General Patton said to take our time, sir. Be thorough. Colonel Harkins stares at the warehouse, at the weapons, at the German prisoners who are still organized, still commanded, still intact as fighting units, and he understands. This isn't about inventory. This is about keeping the Germans ready. Ready for what? He returns to Frankfurt that night and goes straight to Eisenhower's headquarters. The next morning, May the 13th, George Patton is summoned to Supreme Headquarters. He arrives in dress uniform, 2 pearl-handled revolvers on his belt, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. Eisenhower doesn't invite him to sit. George, why are there 40,000 armed Germans in your POW camps? They're not armed, Ike. They're disarmed. Their weapons are in storage, organized storage. By unit. Why haven't those weapons been destroyed? Patton meets his gaze. Because I might need them. The room goes silent. Adele Smith, standing near the wall, stops writing. Eisenhower's face is stone. You might need them. Need them for what? The Germans, Patton says, are the only decent people left in Europe. The Germans. Eisenhower's voice is rising now. The Germans? The people who started this war? Who murdered millions? Those Germans? The Wehrmacht fought honorably. They're disciplined, professional, and they hate the Russians more than they ever hated us. If we're going to confront Stalin, and we will, Ike, sooner or later, I'd rather have panzer divisions fighting with us than sitting in prison camps. Eisenhower leans forward. You want to rearm the Wehrmacht? George, we just spent 4 years and hundreds of thousands of American lives destroying them, and now you want to give them guns and point them east. They fought well, Patton says simply. Better than our allies in the east. Get out. Eisenhower's voice is quiet, but it cuts like steel. Get out. And when you return to Bavaria, you will personally oversee the destruction of every weapon in those camps. Every rifle, every shell, every round of ammunition. You will disband those German units and scatter the prisoners. Do you understand me? Patton stares at him for a long moment. Then he salutes. Yes, sir. He turns and walks out. That night, Eisenhower writes in his private diary, Patton has lost his mind. I may have to relieve him. But Eisenhower doesn't relieve him. Not yet. Because he believes the situation is contained. He believes Patton will follow orders this time. He believes the fire is finally out. He's wrong. May 15th, 1945. London. British intelligence headquarters. A signals officer intercepts Soviet military communications and brings them to his commanding officer. The messages are from Soviet generals in eastern Germany reporting back to Moscow, and they mention Americans. Aggressive American reconnaissance activity near demarcation line. Third Army vehicles observed in Soviet-controlled sector 3 times in past week. American provocations increasing. Request guidance on rules of engagement. The British intelligence officer reads the intercepts and immediately contacts the Prime Minister's office. Within hours, Winston Churchill is reading them himself. And Churchill, who has been warning about Soviet intentions for months, who coined the phrase that will define the next 50 years, the Iron Curtain, understands immediately what's happening. George Patton is provoking the Soviets, and if the Soviets respond, if shooting starts, it won't matter who fired first. The alliance will shatter. World War III will begin. Not someday, now. Churchill sends a cable directly to President Harry S. Truman, who is aboard the USS Augusta, sailing to Europe for the Potsdam Conference. The cable is marked urgent and eyes only. Your General Patton is going to start World War III if you don't leash him immediately. Truman reads the cable in his private cabin. He's only been president for 1 month. Franklin Roosevelt died on April 12th, just weeks before Germany's surrender. Truman is still finding his footing, still learning the complexities of global leadership. And now he's being told that one of his generals is threatening the entire post-war order. He cables Eisenhower immediately. 2 words: control Patton. Then he adds a third line: or relieve him. But while Eisenhower is receiving orders to contain Patton, 1,500 miles to the east, in Moscow, Joseph Stalin is learning about Patton too. And unlike Eisenhower, Stalin isn't angry. He's intrigued. May 18th, 1945. The Kremlin. Stalin sits at the head of a long table in a windowless conference room. Around him are the men who won the Eastern Front: Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who took Berlin; Marshal Ivan Konev, who liberated Prague; Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, who destroyed Army Group Center. These are the greatest military commanders in Soviet history, and Stalin has called them here to discuss one American general. Tell me. Zhukov opens a file. George Smith Patton, 4-star general. Commands U.S. Third Army, approximately 300,000 men, 12 divisions, fully mechanized. They occupy Bavaria and western Czechoslovakia, approximately 60 to 80 miles from our forward positions. Stalin nods. I know where he is. I want to know what he's doing. Zhukov continues. Soviet intelligence reports that Patton has been conducting reconnaissance operations near our lines. His vehicles have crossed into Soviet-controlled territory on multiple occasions. He has been requesting maps of Poland and Western Russia, and according to our sources, he has been giving speeches to his officers about— Zhukov pauses, choosing his words carefully— about the real enemy being in the east. He thinks we are the real enemy? Yes, Comrade Stalin. And he wants to attack us? Our intelligence suggests he has been advocating for immediate military action against the Soviet Union. Yes. Stalin is silent for a moment. Then he looks at Konev. If Patton attacks, can we stop him? Konev considers. Third, they are well-equipped, experienced, and aggressive, but they are one army. We have 5 fronts in Eastern Europe, over 1.5 million. If they attack, we will destroy them. How long would it take? Maybe a month. But Comrade Stalin, they have air superiority. Their logistics are intact. Ours are stretched from Moscow to Berlin. If Patton strikes before we consolidate our positions, it would be costly. Stalin turns to Zhukov. Your assessment? Zhukov speaks carefully. Third Army could inflict significant damage in the short term. They could take Warsaw, perhaps even reach our border. But they cannot sustain an offensive. They would be overextended, surrounded, destroyed. The question is not whether we would win. The question is, how many Soviet soldiers would die before we did? Stalin nods slowly. Then he asks the question that matters most. Is Patton acting alone, or is this American policy? The Soviet ambassador to the United States, Andrei Gromyko, is present at the meeting. He speaks up. Our diplomatic contacts indicate that President Truman has no intention of war with the Soviet Union. The American people are exhausted. They want their soldiers home. Congress would never authorize another. Patton is a rogue, Comrade Stalin. The Americans will remove him. Stalin considers this. He spent years studying his enemies. He knows Churchill hates communism. He suspects Truman is weak. But Patton is something different. Patton is a warrior who sees the world clearly. This Patton, Stalin says quietly, he understands power. If the Americans had more generals like him, we would have serious problems. He pauses, then makes his decision. We will not provoke the Americans, but we will not be unprepared. Zhukov, Konev, keep your tank divisions in position. Do not demobilize. Reinforce supply lines. If Patton attacks, I want him destroyed within 2 weeks. Understood? Yes, Comrade Stalin. And monitor him closely. I want to know everything he does, everything he says. If the Americans are planning to betray us, The meeting ends. Soviet forces in Eastern Europe, which were beginning to stand down after 4 years of war, are ordered back to full alert. Tank divisions that were scheduled for demobilization stay in position. Supply convoys that were heading back to Russia are rerouted west. By late May 1945, over 200,000 Soviet troops have been redeployed to face Third Army positions. The alliance is fracturing. Soviet and American soldiers are staring at each other across the demarcation line, both fully armed, both on edge, both waiting to see if someone will shoot first. And the man responsible for it is 500 miles away in Bavaria, convinced he's right. June 7th, 1945. Berlin. The Allied Victory Parade. American, British, and Soviet troops march through the ruins of the German Bands play, the war is over, and the victors are celebrated. But behind the pageantry, in private rooms away from cameras, the President Truman meets privately with General Eisenhower. They're alone in a room at the Allied Control Council building. Truman gets straight to the point. Ike, I've been getting cables from reports from our intelligence. I've heard enough about General Patton and his opinion. What's your assessment? Can he follow orders? Eisenhower doesn't answer immediately. He's thought about this question for weeks now. He's known George Patton since they trained together, planned together, fought together across North Africa, Sicily, France, Germany. Patton is the best battlefield commander Eisenhower has ever seen. But this isn't about battlefield command anymore. Mr. Dare, President Eisenhower says finally, George Patton is the finest tactical general in the United States Army, maybe the finest we've ever had. He wins battles that no one else could win. He inspires his men like no one else. But he doesn't understand politics. He doesn't understand diplomacy. And he will not let this Russia issue go. Can he follow orders? But if he disagrees, he'll find ways around them. Keep the letter. Violet. Truman nods. He's a former artillery officer himself. He understands military culture. But he's also the president, and he has responsibilities beyond the military. Then we move him, Truman says, away from the Soviets. Somewhere he can't start a war. Sir, transfer him, somewhere without Soviet contact. Someplace where his talents won't cause an international incident. Eisenhower understands. It's the right decision, but it's painful. I'll take care of it, sir. Days later, on June 11th, George Patton is informed that he's being relieved as commander of 3rd Army. He will be reassigned to command 15th Army, a headquarters unit tasked with writing the official history of the European campaign. It's a paper assignment, a desk job. For a man who lives for combat, it's a humiliation. Patton meets with Eisenhower one final time. The meeting is private, no aides present. For a few minutes, they're not supreme commander and subordinate general. They're old friends having a hard conversation. You're benching me, Patton says, because I told the truth about the Russians. I'm reassigning you because you won't follow orders, George. You wanted to rearm the Wehrmacht. You wanted to invade Poland. You conducted unauthorized reconnaissance. You nearly started a war with our allies. Those aren't decisions you get to make. Someone has to make them, Ike. Patton's voice is rising. We just handed half of Europe to Stalin. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania. We promised those countries freedom, and now they're under Soviet occupation. In 10 years, we'll be fighting the Russians anyway. So why not now, when we're strong? When we're ready? When we have the advantage? Eisenhower stands and walks to the window. Outside, the ruins of Germany stretch to the horizon. Cities destroyed, a continent in ruins. And Patton wants to start again. Because, George, Eisenhower says quietly, war isn't just about being ready, it's about being right. And you're not right about this. Patton stares at him. Then he says the words that will define him, that will echo through history, that will be debated for the next 80 years. We may have been fighting the wrong enemy all along. The room goes silent. Eisenhower turns to face him. What did you say? Patton doesn't back down. You heard. The Germans were never the real threat. Brutal? Yes. Evil? Absolutely. But they were never going to conquer the world. They didn't have the population, the resources, the reach. But the Soviets? They have all three. They have 200 million people. They control half of Eurasia. And they have an ideology they want to spread across the entire world. We just spent 4 years destroying the one country that could have stopped them. And now there's nothing between Stalin and the Atlantic Ocean except us. Germany started this war, Eisenhower says, and we ended it by empowering something worse. Patton's voice. Hitler was a monster, Ike. I'm not defending him, but he was a localized monster, a European monster. Stalin is a global threat. Communism is a global, and we just handed them half the world on a silver platter because we were so focused on defeating Hitler that we forgot to ask what comes after. Eisenhower walks back to his desk. He sits down heavily. George, do you have any idea what you're saying? We allied with the Soviets because we had to. They held down 200 German divisions on the Eastern Front. Without them, we never would have landed at Normandy. We never would have crossed them. The Soviets won this war as much as we did. And now they're going to win the peace too, Patton says bitterly. Because we're going home, Ike, we're demobilizing. Sending our boys back to farms and factories. But the Red Army isn't going in. They're staying in Poland, in Hungary, in Romania, building puppet governments, installing communist regimes. And in 10 years, 20 years, we're going to wake up and realize we traded one dictator for another. Except this one is stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than Hitler ever was. Eisenhower is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "You might be right, George. Maybe we will fight the Soviets someday. Maybe the alliance was temporary, and the Cold War is inevitable. But it's not your decision when that war starts. It's not my decision, it's the president's decision. And right now, President Truman says we're at peace with the Soviet Union. So that's the world we live in." Patton stands, he salutes. Eisenhower returns the salute. And then Patton walks out of Supreme Headquarters for the last time as a combat commander. The quote spreads quickly. "We may have been fighting the wrong enemy all along." Within days, it's being repeated in officers' clubs across occupied Germany. Some officers agree, others are horrified. Soviet intelligence includes the quote and reports. Stalin reads it personally and writes in the margin, "This one saw clearly." American diplomats scramble to downplay it, calling it the opinion of one general, not official policy. But the quote captures something that many in the West are beginning to feel. The alliance with Stalin was never comfortable. It was built on necessity, and now that the necessity is gone, the cracks are showing. Patton's words prove eerily prophetic. By March 1946, less than a year after Germany's surrender, Winston Churchill delivers his Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, declaring that an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent of Europe. The Cold War has officially begun. By 1948, the Soviets blockade Berlin, trying to starve the western sectors into submission. President Truman responds with the Berlin airlift, supplying the city by air for 11 months. The confrontation Patton predicted is happening. By June 1950, Communist North Korea, backed by Stalin and supplied with Soviet weapons, invades South Korea. American soldiers find themselves fighting Soviet-made T-34 tanks and MiG-15 fighters. The war Patton said was inevitable has arrived, just 5 years late and on a different peninsula. Over the next 46 years, the United States spends approximately $13 trillion, adjusted for inflation, on the Cold War, more than the entire cost of World War II. American forces fight Soviet proxies in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, Nicaragua. Nuclear arsenals grow to apocalyptic size. The world lives under the shadow of mutual assured destruction for half a century. Was Patton right? Was the Soviet Union the real enemy all along, and Nazi Germany just a distraction? History doesn't give easy answers. Germany started World War. Germany built the concentration camps. Germany bore responsibility for tens of millions of deaths. Defeating Hitler was morally necessary and strategically essential. But Patton's strategic instinct that the Soviet Union would become America's primary adversary, that communism would threaten the West for generations, that the alliance was temporary and the confrontation inevitable. That instinct was correct. His error was one of timing, not analysis. In May 1945, the American public was exhausted. Soldiers wanted to come home. Families wanted peace. Congress would never have authorized another war, especially against an ally. The Soviet Union, despite its losses, still fielded the largest army in the world. An immediate war with Russia would have been politically impossible and militarily catastrophic. But Patton wasn't thinking politically. He was thinking strategically, and strategically he saw what was coming. Years later, when Eisenhower was president, he reflected on Patton in his memoirs. He wrote, "George Patton was a brilliant commander who won battles no one else could win. Brave, aggressive, innovative. But he never understood that winning wars requires more than winning battles. It requires winning the peace." And in 1945, peace with Russia, however uneasy, was more important than another war, however justified. Stalin, in a private conversation with Yugoslav communist Milovan Djilas in late 1945, mentioned Patton specifically. According to Djilas's memoir, Stalin said, "That general, Patton, he was not afraid of us. He understood power. The Americans should have listened to him. They will regret that they didn't." Both men, in their own way, were acknowledging the same truth. Patton saw the future clearly. But seeing the future and being able to change it are two different things. George S. Patton never got the chance to find out if he was right. On December 9, 1945, just 7 months after Germany's surrender, Patton was riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany, when it collided with an American Army truck. Patton suffered a severe spinal injury. For 12 days, he lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, unable to move from the neck down. On December 21st, 1945, he died of a pulmonary embolism. He was 60 years old. He never returned to the United States. He was buried at the American Cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of Third Army who had died under his command. His grave was placed in a position of honor, but not set apart. He wanted to be buried with his men, and there's one detail about his burial that some historians note, though whether it was intentional or coincidence, no one knows for certain. His grave faces east, toward Germany, and beyond Germany, toward Russia. Toward the enemy he believed America should have fought, toward the enemy he never got to face. Within 3 years of his death, the Berlin airlift proved him right about Soviet intentions. Within 5 years, American tanks were fighting Soviet T-34s in Korea, perhaps commanded by officers Patton had trained. Within a decade, the world was locked in a nuclear standoff that would last until 1991. The wrong enemy? History suggests George Patton saw more clearly than his superiors wanted to admit. Whether acting on that vision in May 1945 would have been wise is a different question. But the fact that he saw it when so many others didn't tells us something about the man. He was a warrior who understood geopolitics, a tactician who thought strategically, a general who looked beyond the current war to the next one. And in the end, he was buried, facing the direction he always believed the real threat would come from. If this story gave you a new perspective on World War II and the Cold War that followed, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to WWII Elite. We bring you the untold stories that shaped history, the moments that textbooks skipped, the decisions that changed the world, because the more you know about the past, the better you understand the present. Thanks for watching. And remember, history is never as simple as we think.